We'd just like to acknowledge and celebrate the Ngunnawal people on whose traditional lands we meet today and pay our respects to elders past and present. Okay, so we've got Bhavani here sitting with you, a learning advisor with academic skills, and I'm Julian, also a learning advisor with academic skills. We're very happy that you're here today for our Academic Integrity Awareness Day, where we are going to be focusing on how to write with academic integrity. There's a lot to this, so please feel free to ask questions in the chat as I go over the first bits, and then we will have some time to discuss things via Menti and ask more questions on that platform as well. But feel free to chat and use Menti as you wish. We are here to help you answer your questions as best we can and answer anything that comes up with what we are presenting to you. So we'd like to talk about why avoiding plagiarism can often be difficult, and would like to hear your thoughts on that too and what you might be particularly struggling with. And then we have a systematic approach to taking notes with academic integrity and therefore then being able to write more clearly and with the intention of writing with academic integrity, and that comes a little bit later in the session. So hopefully that will help you set you on the path that you might be looking for if you have any issues with this. And we're going to focus on synthesizing as a way to avoid plagiarism, as a way to just write well, as a way to write with academic integrity, and as well as a way to write that really strengthens your argument and shows your own ability to bring together various sources and put them together and discuss them using your own voice. So synthesis is kind of, and we'll go over it a little bit more and show you some examples, but we're kind of highlighting that mode of incorporating sources as one that is a good skill to develop, that will take some time to develop, but really can show off your sophisticated writing skills and ability to incorporate sources well. And hopefully we'll be getting to show you how to learn the value of gaining confidence in your own ideas and develop authorial voice. That's something that takes time, certainly, but it's great that you're here to begin, or as you're on that journey of learning to value your own ideas and have confidence in your own ideas and your own authorial voice. That's what it's really about as well. Okay, so getting to more of our slides. So why is it important to produce work with academic integrity? Well, it's a requirement. It's part of our new, as in at the end of last year, we had a new academic integrity rule. We had one before that from 2015, and this one is an update that really focuses on academic integrity. Rather than just like avoiding misconduct and avoiding plagiarism, this one's more about the positive aspects of how to uphold integrity. So it's kind of a nicer, more positive way of looking at things. And we'll look at a little bit of an excerpt from that rule and kind of try to focus on that as a way to think about how we can show our academic integrity when we submit our academic writing. But it's more than just complying. As I'm saying, that rule itself is about being ethical, honest, and respectful. And so that's a good thing, I think, to tap into. It's not just I have to avoid these things, I have to follow these rules, but it really is about have ethical, honest, respectful academic practice, which is what we'd expect from our lecturers, from researchers. So it's what we should also expect of ourselves as we are, as students at various levels, becoming scholars, joining that scholarly community. So we want to recognize that as researchers and scholars, our ideas are important. So we have to acknowledge them, recognize those ideas. You yourself, if you become that kind of scholar or researcher, you too would want your ideas acknowledged and respected and recognized in the appropriate, correct way. So we've got to pay that respect at this point. And it will lift the quality of your research if you, are doing this correctly, if you're writing with academic integrity and following those, conventions of referencing and citing and using sources well and making your voice really apparent and clear, then that's going to lift the quality of your own writing and your own research impact. And, we've got to think about how we're sharing ideas, how we're building on the work of others, and that's how we innovate, and that's how we, have progress, how we affect change in our various disciplines. So we've got to show how our work builds on the work of others. That's very key to joining in the academic conversation, joining in the academic community that you're various communities that you're all a part of. Okay, so here's our little excerpt of the academic integrity principle. And we just want to highlight here that it's, all about that second one, upholding the commitment to academic integrity. How do you do that? You do that by behaving honestly, responsibly, and ethically with respect and fairness. So, who doesn't want to do that? I know we all want to do that. We've got to think about how we can do that. So I'm not sure what situation you guys are all in, but it's not about, kind of being careless or being lazy, right? Because it's kind of taking notes in a way without, much consideration to recognizing, taking in your notes, who that source is, where that came from, kind of having a bit of messy notes, not being sure how to cite it, where to cite it, where did you get that information from. It is about being careful, consistent, honest, respectful for that work that you are, and those ideas that you are wanting to use in your own academic work. And, the way to uphold that principle is to respect that work and to then use that appropriately through referencing and acknowledging that source in the, recognized correct way. One second. As I said before, I've got some allergies today with the turn of weather. Okay, so from our perspective, this is not just a burden, but as we said, it's it's going to strengthen your work. It's going to show that you've read widely and critically and understand the contribution of others. So, to show that you've read widely, like we said before, with synthesis, that is a way to show you've read widely by citing several sources in the brackets or in footnotes. That allows you to kind of show that span of your wide reading and to show also that you've read critically. And that's a bit about, showing your stance towards the work that you are citing, showing that you, really think that work is very strong and valid and thorough, or, that work has neglected a particular element or aspect, and that's where you come in to fill that research gap. So being critical doesn't only mean, or doesn't mean being negative per se. It means questioning the text. It means your stance towards the text and not taking everything as a neutral or 100% capital T true piece of source material or piece of reading. To question that material, to evaluate it, and to put that evaluation and stance into your writing is a way to upskill your own writing and show your progression in your ability to build your work on the work of others. Okay. So it also is showing how you're distinguishing your ideas from others. So again, your stance will do that if you are able to take a clear stance in your writing to show how you feel about that particular research that you are citing, that source material. You're going to be able to distinguish your ideas from the work of others. And we'll look at some examples of how that's done coming up really quickly. Okay, so it involves legitimately incorporating others' ideas into your work using the correct referencing in the in-text or footnote, as well as in the end reference list. Writing in your own words, so being able to paraphrase in a way that is wouldn't show up in Turnitin as unoriginal. So you want to, and we'll show you some of our techniques for how to really put those paraphrases into your own words, as well as referencing correctly and showing your critical analysis, developing your writer's stance and voice. Again, this is going to take time, but as we show you some examples and as you do more of your own reading of the source material, there's one way of reading where you're looking for source material and you're thinking about the debate and the problem and how to answer the question that you've been given or how to develop your own question. And there's another way to read where you are reading for an understanding of how the author has put together their critical stance and how the author has asserted their own voice. And that's another way for you to develop your own skills. If you read something that you quite like and think, wow, they've really led me through this piece of research and their argument very clearly. You want to think about and break that down. How have they done that? How have they shown their stance towards the source material they're using? How have they built their literature review section by showing how their work builds on the work of others, but also carving out that space for themselves to show, here's where I step in and join the conversation and fill an important gap. Okay, so we've got 4 ways to do this. We've got 4 ways to incorporate sources into your writing. You can do these with academic integrity, or there's ways to do it with academic misconduct. We want to avoid that. But these are the 4 choices you have for how to incorporate sources into your writing. Got summary, paraphrase, quote, and synthesis. So summarizing, and we'll look at some examples of how these are done. But summarizing is explaining someone's argument using your own words, but it's a larger chunk of a whole article's argument, maybe a whole section, but it's not just a small piece. And so you want to think about how you, in your own words, can capture the essence of that argument, focusing on those main big ideas rather than smaller details. And it's important to be able to distinguish that in your mind, to know when I'm doing now a summary of this entire article rather than I'm taking this little piece of information from a couple sentences or a couple of paragraphs, because that's more of a paraphrase. But either one, in a summary or a paraphrase, you want to practice, and in your note taking, really think about how you can put this into your own words. So with your summary, we often suggest, after you read a source material that you think is going to be helpful and appropriate for whatever it is you're writing, you want to write that summary. You want to write a sentence that summarizes what you've just read and how it's relevant to your own argument or your own developing argument. That practice, that just, this is what I do when I read. I take these notes, I write a summary in my own words. That's a really good way to just continually develop that skill and not save it for, the moments when you're actually composing your work. So paraphrase, on the other hand, is still in your own words, but it is, maybe a couple paragraphs, maybe one paragraph, maybe a couple sentences that you've picked out and said, this particular idea is something that's really important to my argument as well. And I want to put that in. And for those cases, you want to think about how to put that into your own words. And again, we'll show you our strategy coming up, but you need to, when you are citing that, include the page number. So with a summary, you wouldn't include the page number in the in-text citation because it covers a wide range. It covers, the whole article itself. It could. Whereas a paraphrase would be on a particular page. So you want to indicate that in your writing. You want to be able to, show the reader through the way you've discussed the idea that it's a summary, that it's a wide-ranging summary that you've put forth, and then you wouldn't use a page number. And then when you put through a more focused detail, then you would put the page number. And that's a way to indicate to the reader when you've done a summary and when you've done a paraphrase, and to also show, writing with academic integrity, that you're recognizing the work in this really careful way. Now, there's also quoting, where you're copying the other's words exactly, putting quote marks around it. And you are, of course, putting a page number in that case, as well, as that would come from a particular page, and you want to indicate what page that is. Again, that's in the in-text reference. You want to quote sparingly. It's only about key ideas. When it's a primary text, you certainly want to quote when you are doing literary studies or historical studies and you've got a primary text. You would be quoting from that and analyzing it. And perhaps you're quoting every now and then from a secondary source, but you want to do that with intention. You want to think about why you're quoting, why you're putting someone else's voice into your own work, because that's a disruption to the reader. We want to read really in your voice. And when we get another voice, it's okay. But if we get lots of other voices in that writing, we're going to feel a little bit lost. And we need your voice, to lead us through it quite carefully. So you really want to be sparing with quotes. But when you feel like that key idea, it's a seminal researcher, they've said something in a really succinct way, and you want to just put that in, that's a good reason to do it. But you want to think about your reasoning for all of these, why you're making these choices. You want to do them intentionally. Now you are thinking more specifically about these 4 ways of incorporating sources. You want to think about why you'd use a certain way of incorporating source, and what your intention is there in using that source. Now the final one is synthesis, combining multiple sources that have a similar argument. That's going to show your wide-ranging research, right? If you're able to say there's consensus here, and you can cite 3, 4 names in the bracket or in the footnotes, that shows that, yep, there's consensus here. You have a strong argument to build off of in that case. Or you can show, a debate that several scholars say one thing and argue one thing, and other scholars argue a different point of view. And you can set up the debate in that way, rather than just saying one person and one person, showing that strength is important to indicate, that conversation is one that is ongoing, that is important, that a lot of people are contributing to and have, stances and arguments towards. Okay, so now we've got this model paragraph. Hopefully everyone can see that in the room. That's a little bit far away, but I'll read out and go through it sentence by sentence. So this is one from business about blockchain technology. And so we'll talk about what's good about this paragraph. It's a model paragraph, but we can also talk about where they could do a little bit more to show their voice, perhaps. So we've got blockchain technology offers opportunities for increasing security and privacy on the internet, but there are some serious limitations. So I think that's a good topic sentence, because they're putting forth an argument about blockchain technology. They're saying it does these, it has these good elements, but there are some serious limitations. It really sets up the point of the paragraph so that we as readers know what to expect coming up in this paragraph. Now we know, well, this paragraph is going to indicate the opportunities, first of all, and then it's going to highlight the serious limitations. So I think that's really good as the topic sentence, that it doesn't have any citation within it, that it is the author's own voice putting forth their position, covering the main point of the paragraph to follow. Now we've got, next up, we've got a paraphrase. Blockchain technology has opened up a potential way of conducting transactions where less personal information needs to be shared. Now, I said before that paraphrases would have page numbers. However, this source is an online source that doesn't have any page numbers. So if that's the case and you've paraphrased, then it's not possible to include a page number when there are none for an online source. You do want to avoid .com online sources as you can. But in this case, this author, writes a lot about blockchains and Bitcoins for an online magazine. So that's where this one comes from. And then we've got more of a summary. Researchers such as these 3 suggest that by removing third parties from the transaction, blockchain provides an opportunity for users to have better control and ownership over their data. So we've got another summary there that sounds kind of wide ranging, what they suggest. And then we've got another summary. However, critics caution. So we've got that turn now where we've got the positives, and now we've got those limitations. However, critics caution that there are some serious challenges in terms of accountability when machines control transactions. Okay, we've got that shift now. Moreover, there are a number of ways in which the security of blockchain transactions can be compromised, such as code-based attacks, double spending, and dust attacks. So that sounds quite particular. So that's a paraphrase where we can put the page number. And then another scholar and others point out transaction patterns can be observed, and it is possible to link a user identity to an address. So we've got a quote there, and we've definitely got a page number. And we've got finally a paraphrase. Additionally, Bassina and Castro highlight a key flaw in the security of blockchain technology where privacy keys can be lost, just like real currency. Okay, so we've got all these sentences here. That's a lot of research being done. So it shows their wide-ranging research and pointing out who says, the positive elements and who are the critics, pointing out some of those negative elements, using various ways to incorporate sources. So that's a good example in that technical aspect. They're using Harvard here. And so Harvard has just updated their referencing style in that the Harvard version that we use at ANU, which is the Australian government publishing style. And so they've just updated to this style where they indicate the page number using a colon and then after the year and then the, naming the numeral after that. Then we've got our concluding sentence. It is early days, but analysis so far is indicating that there may be a number of issues that need to be considered before there is wider adoption of blockchain technology. So ending there with their own sentence, finally, because all those other sentences were citing sources, citing, singular sources. And so, it's good that we have this concluding sentence here that is in the author's own words, analyzing what has just occurred and kind of putting it together for us as the reader, really focusing on and mirroring that topic sentence, which is about the number of issues, the serious limitations, they say at the top, and then here they're saying, yep, there are a number of issues that we have to consider before we can go further with this technology. So, the good things about it we've seen, I would say perhaps to improve, although it is a good model paragraph, this could have a bit more synthesis, right? We're picking out different authors and discussing them. And so it might be a good idea to think about how we could synthesize a bit more and get a little bit more of a sense of the author's viewpoint and stance towards this work. And that's something you develop more into later year undergrad, postgrad, PhD is what I'm suggesting here as well. This author has also done a good thing in terms of naming certain authors, doing author prominent, discussing the author in the sentence, and then, putting certain authors in the brackets and making the information more prominent, writing in an information prominent way. So that's another decision you have, and that's up to you. And it's good to be intentional about when you name the author and when you put the author in brackets. Why are you naming the author? You're highlighting the author. What is the reason and intention for that? It's good to do both, but it's good to have also your own reasoning for why you're making those choices. Okay. And so that's what, this is a good example, like I said, and it's quite a basic way to use all the different, many of the different ways to incorporate sources. But there are other times when you might want to write an extended summary or, more of a synthesis. And like we said, that's missing in the previous example. So in longer research writing, you might be expected to do a bit more than those basics. So here's a poor example of an extended summary. One paper examines 3 theories that have been put forward linking autism to vaccines. One theory is that the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine causes autism by triggering a gastrointestinal symptoms, including intestinal inflammation. Here, Wakefield's controversial 1998 study is demolished, putting in doubt the rigor of his research. This shows that Wakefield's findings are not possible as they are inconsistent with other well-known research. Another popular theory that vaccines overwhelm children's immune system is also untrue. 20 epidemiological and biological studies from around the world have consistently found no evidence in support of these claims that vaccines cause autism. Moreover, it is untrue that vaccines weaken the immune system. And besides, autism does not travel through the immune system. Okay, so several issues here, and there's some informal writing and word choices that, aren't the best choices. But the biggest issue here, and we signal early on, this is a poor example because we're not sure exactly who is saying what. When is the author saying things and when are they, and what exactly, or which research are they referring to? To talk about one paper, Wakefield, this shows all these other studies, there are not enough citations going on. And really what they have here is an extended summary, but it's not clear that they're talking about one particular paper as they're going through. So here's the better improvement here to this extended summary, which is actually all about this one paper by Gerber and Offit. So in these highlighted phrases, we can see the author incorporating the source in a clear way so that we understand how they want us as readers to understand this source material and how the author themselves feel about this source material, their stance towards it. So we've got Gerber and Offit critically examine 3 theories. Okay, so we know who's doing what here, that these scholars are doing the work here that this author is discussing. examine 3 theories that have been put forward linking autism to vaccines. So that's our topic sentence, letting us know what's going to be following here. One such theory is that the MRR vaccine causes autism by triggering these symptoms. Here, authors demolish. Still, that's a strong word. So, you may or may not use such a strong word in your own writing. They demolish Wakefield's controversial 1998 study, questioning the rigor of his research and showing that Wakefield's findings are not possible as they are inconsistent with other well-known research. Page numbers there. That's very good to see. And, we're talking about Gerber and Offit and how they have demolished or, shown that Wakefield's study is not true. And that's all much clearer now. Gerber and Offit also convincingly argue. So there they understand through that adverb, convincingly argue. So now we know, okay, the author definitely finds this to be a positive research that they are, choosing to highlight in this extended summary. Against another popular theory that vaccines overwhelm children's immune systems, they draw on. We know they mean, with they draw on, we know they mean Gerber and Offit. 20 epidemiological and biological studies from around the world that have found no evidence in support of these claims. Moreover, they argue that, and then we have a quote here. So that's a much clearer, extended summary. Hopefully that, makes sense to you, and you can see how using these words, particularly in the beginnings of sentences, helps to lead the reader through so that we are able to follow along. And I just have one more example about synthesis before I throw over to Bhavani to run the Menti and discuss more with you. But, we really want to encourage you to think about synthesis and how to do that. And how to try to incorporate sources in that way in your own writing, pulling together those multiple sources of text that are similar, that say similar things to demonstrate your wide and critical reading. It's hard to do, but it's an important skill that really can push your writing forward and show your rigor. So this is just the basic example. We've got this consensus here between these scholars. Economists and behavioral scientists have documented this cross-sectional evidence for an approximately U-shaped path of happiness and well-being over the majority of the human lifespan. So we found 2 scholars that have said that. That's a synthesis. Maybe more, if possible, would be even stronger if that is the case. So we've got the synthesis of the argument, and the citation includes them both, and we've got that semicolon there to indicate they're 2 different sources put together. Okay, and now here's something a little more extended that you might want to try as a way of showing the kind of way that a particular work has affected other works, and then that would show how your work then would lead into how your work builds on the work of these other scholars. But this one kicks off with Mahmoud's work has inspired some sociologists to consider how the process of becoming a religious subject can be agentive. So it sounds like Mahmoud is the kind of star of the show here. She's done some important seminal work, and now we're going to learn how others have used that work, drawn on that work, and built upon it. So another scholar draws on Mahmoud's work as well as on another element of sociological research doing gender literature to argue that Orthodox Jewish women are actively doing religion with the aim of becoming good religious subjects. Similarly, another scholar examines how Muslim converts produce new moral selves through embodied religious practices. So I thought this was a good example and a more sophisticated example of synthesis. And this comes from a peer-reviewed journal article around how you can kind of tell a little bit of the potted history of a particular area of research, how others have built on it. And now we can get the sense that this author, Ronaldo, is going to now soon insert herself and say how she is, how her work has been inspired by Mahmoud and builds on that as well. And maybe the work of these others that she's citing. Okay, before we move on to Menti, are there any questions? And let me know in the chat as well about these examples and how they were used and what you were thinking about them. Well, you can think about that, and we can also just move on to the Menti that Bhavani has ready for us. Oh, and someone's got someone in the chat. Thank you, Bhavani.
Thank you very much, Julian. So now that Julian's given us quite a good and extensive rundown about the challenges of engaging in conduct that complies with academic integrity in our academic writing and some of the different ways that we can do this more effectively, I'd like you to take a moment to think about and share with all of us what are some of the challenges that we face when we're trying to avoid plagiarism. Why is it so hard for us to not engage in plagiarism? So have a think about it. Head across to Menti. That's www.menti.com and enter the numeric code that's there on the screen and also in the chat for those who are joining us online. And let us know what you find particularly difficult about avoiding plagiarism.
Do you want me to stop sharing, Bhavani? And do you want to share now?
That'd be great. Thanks, Julian.
Yeah.
I have a doubt.
Yes.
The one way she told to incorporate sources was quoting direct quotes. Won't they add up to the plagiarism score?
Are you talking about the originality score on Turnitin?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really great question. And yeah, we can take a moment to discuss that now itself while people think of any other questions they might have. So Turnitin is a text matching software. It doesn't necessarily identify plagiarism per se, but rather what it does is it lets you and your markers know that these are instances where it thinks that the text is very closely matching other text in its database. Now, if you have a direct quote, absolutely it's going to highlight that and say, this is a text match. What's important is if you have put your quotation marks in and you have a correct citation, then that is not plagiarism because you have correctly attributed the source correctly attributed that source. So it's not that you cannot have any text matching, but rather if you are doing a direct quote that you 100% match it perfectly, and you have that the attribution to that citation. And if you're paraphrasing, that you're using enough of your own words so that it doesn't come up with a large set of text match. Does that distinction make sense?
Can I add on one thing? So recently what happened was I'm doing postgraduate public health, but one of the environmental studies we have to submit is about 2,000 or 3,000 words. So let's say if I want to quote directly with bracket of maybe early one and the middle or later of one, another one, at least two in there. I mean, very rare, around out of 3,000. But when I change to with the software, it's showing about 45% or 50. So when I look at through the Google, which percentage is good, they said that should be under 10. So I was so panicked. And then I tried to change it and figure out the code is code, you know what I mean? The sun rise from the east or whatever, going back to the back. You cannot change that real figure. This is my example. So what happened was I emailed to my lecturer and she said it's fine, but as long as you correct citation and the references of where you got that from. Yeah.
And this is a really important point because there is no magic number that you should aim for your originality score to be below.
Yeah.
Depending on the particular instructions of your assessment, you might always get a higher one because you have a lot of citations, because maybe everyone has to use the course readings and only the course readings, so everyone will be using the same citations and the same paraphrasing and the same quotes.
Yeah.
So there is no magic number, but rather have you made sure that you have given the correct attribution to the various sources all the way through, regardless of whether you're doing a direct quote, a paraphrase, a summary, or a sentence. Julie, was there anything else you'd like to add about using Turnitin?
Yes. So if you did have a 0, that would be a really bad sign because it would mean you didn't use any sources, or you use sources that no one that no student has ever used before. Turnitin is a huge repository that captures students from all over the world since I don't know when it started, in the 90s. So it's been like decades that they have been collecting their repository. And so if you're not citing anything or you're using sources that no one has ever used before, that's not a good sign. So we definitely don't want to get to a 0. And your marker, whoever it is going to be looking at your Turnitin report, and they are going to analyze it correctly. They are going to say, yep, that's a quote. Yep, that's just like, sometimes Turnitin will highlight the name of an organization, and that's not anything wrong with using that name, that organization. So you have to judge it yourself and try to understand how the lecturer judges it. They're trying to say, or the marker, they're trying to just see when there are, paraphrases that are too close to the original or we're lacking citation. There are other places where you can have issues with plagiarism that have nothing to do with Turnitin. You could have a totally original sentence that doesn't come up as highlighted, but it has a fact in it that should have been cited. And the marker will say, well, this was not, there's some misconduct going on here because you're asserting this without acknowledging the source. And it's also, you could do everything correctly in Turnitin and all your quotes could be beautifully, referenced. However, the lecturer could then say, well, this writing isn't very clear because there's so many quotes in it and the quotes aren't analyzed appropriately. We don't really understand the meaning of these quotes or why you're quoting all these sources. And then that would also drop your grade. So it is about that kind of integration with, like I was saying before, really trying to understand what you want to say, how you want to incorporate the sources, and then, doing it correctly is kind of the baseline.
Thanks, Julian. In the meantime, we've got some really great ideas coming up on our Menti in terms of why we can sometimes find it difficult to avoid plagiarism. So some of these include that oftentimes the reading can be quite dense, difficult and hard to understand. And let's face it, academic writing isn't always well written and particularly easy for us to understand. So this can definitely be a challenge. If that's the case, it probably means that we need to spend a bit more time trying to decipher and distill the information that's trying to be presented in that text before we're able to effectively analyze it and use it ourselves in our own writing to support our own arguments and key messages. Moving on, we've got another suggestion that the majority of ideas have already been discussed previously by other scholars, so it can sometimes be hard to be original. Look, this is an interesting point, but this is all the more reason why it's necessary to recognize that, especially if you are earlier on in your academic journeys, you are unlikely to come up with an original idea, and therefore you have to give the attribution to where you got that idea from. Alternatively, and this is something we're going to look at in a couple more minutes, it's this idea of, while the concept may not be new, your way that you are analyzing it and presenting it is how you is what your contribution is in terms of your particular bit of academic writing. And so it's important that you can distinguish between what is your analysis, your contribution, your interpretation, as opposed to what is the ideas and concepts that you've already got from somebody else. Julian, is there any in particular you would like to speak to? We've got a couple of overlapping ones in relation to it can be difficult to rephrase ideas, or there's a lot of jargon and specific terms.
Yeah.
And in general, with paraphrasing, it is completely acceptable to keep jargon in there because, as you've identified, that can be difficult to change. And not only that, but trying to find a synonym for jargon can often actually end up changing the meaning or intention behind that jargon. However, the rest of the sentence, the rest of the ideas should be your own words. Julian, anything else you wanted to add to that, or any of the other points we've got up here?
Yeah, I wouldn't change specific terms. We've got to use those specific terms, and that wouldn't come up as unoriginal. If it's a term, that means like a word or two. So that's not going to be, a huge chunk of a sentence. So we've got to use specific terms. Jargon is often used, a little bit pejoratively. So you might want to use, I don't know if you're using that interchangeably, but you might want to explain jargon at least, and let the reader know a little bit more about what you're referring to when you're, using that term, or unless it's just a specific term is what you mean. And then that can be more clear what that specific term means. And it is difficult, I agree, if there's facts and data from the WHO, and it's, statistics, it would be good to ask your particular lecturers around what they suggest, you do in those situations, and what those more discipline specific academics who look at that kind of work all the time do, and what they might suggest you do.
Excellent. And we do have one final one here that suggests that because a lot of what you're trying to say has already been said previously, you perhaps don't want your whole paragraph to be sources. And this is an interesting take, because if you look at some of the examples that Julian was showing us a little bit earlier on, and I will just switch back to the slides to have a look at those, then what we can see is that actually almost every single sentence has a citation attached to it. So it's not necessarily that you don't want to have a lot of sources, but rather you want those sources to be supporting your own words and your own analysis and your own interpretation. So you don't want to have your whole paragraph to just be chunks of direct quotes. You don't want the whole thing to be someone else's voice. But you do want to be able to provide those sources, those citations, to show where it is that you've got that analysis, that interpretation, that evidence from, to provide extra strength and support to your particular argument or key message.
And also, my understanding is now, after finishing that happening a few weeks ago, so if you read it through that lots of citation, that initially I thought, why I think like I'm copying and paste of whoever said ABC, but now I realize that whoever read it through our articles or the essay, they know that how much we put in the effort to analyze and rephrase in all those stuff. So we've been looking through the 6, 7, 8 research or article to get that one paragraph. So which is a kind of we are doing hard working, you know what I mean? But initially I thought my previous life, I thought, oh, it is a kind of like, you know what I mean? One line from one person, one line from different researcher, but not really. So it is okay to be done, but we need to put on the citation and references.
Absolutely. So, you know, we've got a sense, we know what plagiarism is, and we know why we need to avoid it. However, it still occurs despite our best intentions, because it can be a really complex thing to try and identify, you know, what do we need to cite, when do we need to provide referencing, when is it clear that it's our own voice. So let's have a look at a couple of the common mistakes that students tend to make, and then moving on what we can do to try and avoid that in our own practice. So there are 4 common mistakes that we often see. And the first of these is when there is a missing reference. So this is when you have drawn on someone else's idea or concept and we just haven't provided any citations whatsoever. And we saw a lot of examples of this in the example Julian shared of a poor example of paraphrasing and summarizing. Another common mistake is when we miss quotation marks. So this is when we have a direct quote and we forget to put those quotation marks in. And this is particularly problematic because even if we put the citation, but if we don't put the quote marks, we're not correctly acknowledging that this is actually not our own words, but that we're taking someone else's words as is. So it's really important that you have both the quotation marks and your citation. Now, if we go to the bottom left-hand corner, another big challenge can be when we're trying to paraphrase, but we do it insufficiently. And so what ends up happening is we change a few words here and there, or perhaps we just flip the sentence structure around. But by and large, we keep most of the original words and structure of the sentence. And as Julian was mentioning before, this is not the same thing as paraphrasing. It's not enough to simply change 1 or 2 words here or there, or to sit there with a thesaurus and just go change a couple of big words. That is not paraphrasing. Instead, the goal is that we should take that entire concept or idea, rewrite it entirely or as much as possible as jargon permits in our own words. And what this often means is that compared to summarizing, paraphrasing will often end up being the same or a similar length as the original work that you are trying to paraphrase, because you are trying to write that same concept in detail, but in your own words. And then the last one we have in the bottom right-hand corner is when there is some ambiguity about the source or the voice. And this is where it is not clear whether what you're writing is your own words, your own analysis and interpretation, or whether what you're writing is what some other source has already previously said. And we saw some of these examples earlier on from when Julian took us through a couple of examples. So let's have a look at, first of all, how does it come to happen that we tend to sometimes accidentally engage in plagiarism? A common cause for this is when we engage in something known as patch writing. So patch writing is the practice of copying from a source text and then deleting some words or altering grammatical structures, or perhaps plugging in one-for-one synonym substitutes. And what happens is that often the language from one or more of these source texts is not only adopted, but also woven into the student's text. And it's mixed with parts that have been written more autonomously. So basically, students are attempting to include every little bit of information that they've collected during their research and put it to their notes. And then they're trying to stitch this all together into some sort of a patchwork by trying to join together fragments of various ideas and sources, but by trying to make as few changes as possible to the original notes they've taken from this original source. And so the problem occurs when people start taking lots of notes by copying and pasting various bits from different sources, different excerpts into the one document. And then they try to string together these different notes together by adding a couple of joining words or sentences here and there to try and mesh it all together. So why does this process go wrong? Well, when we engage in patch writing, the result is often a jumble of ideas with no clear argument and no clear distinction between what the student is trying to say on the topic, your own voice, and what other authors have already said or are saying about that topic. So essentially, the different authors' voices, you as the student, and also the voices of the authors that you have researched and are using to support your argument and key message, are all being blended together. So let's take a moment to have a look at a process that we can use to avoid engaging in patch writing ourselves. And really what it comes down to is adopting a systematic approach to our note-taking. So in the first instance, we need to read the material, read the literature, and we should be reading with a purpose. So we should know what type of information are we trying to extricate? What is the particular question that we're researching about? Why are we actually engaging with this literature? When we read with a purpose, we're able to take notes effectively. We're able to identify what are the key ideas that are relevant to our particular research, and then we can reorder them in a way that helps to formulate and support and strengthen our argument. So essentially, when we read with a purpose, then we can take notes in a way that enables us to critically engage with that literature, with what we're reading. What this means is that when we finally get to writing, we can actually write in our own words because we can change the terms in order because we've actually understood it better since we have critically engaged with the reading when we took our notes. And of course, we can keep those technical terms, but by being able to have a better understanding because we're critically engaged with that literature, then we're better able to decide what is actually going to best serve our needs and how can we write it in our own words so that we put forward our own argument or key message in the most persuasive manner. So most problems with plagiarism tend to occur when we miss that middle step, when we decide to not take notes. So what our goal is to actually write without reference to the original text. When we're writing, we should be looking to our notes rather than going back to the original source. Because if we do that, we're at arm's length from the original source, and then we'll be less inclined to accidentally use the original wording without proper attribution. So here is an example I've got on the screen of how we might go about through using this process, this three-step process of taking notes. So on the left-hand column, we've got the original text. And this is a continuation from an earlier example Julian was using about blockchain technology.
Yes.
So we've got the original text. When we're taking our notes in the middle column, as you can see, they're not necessarily complete sentences. This is just us taking the key ideas from that original text. So we can summarize it down by identifying that blockchain technology provides transparency and decentralization, that transactions are not directly linked to the user, that there are patterns in user transactions, and that the blockchain technology appears secure, but no solution is perfect. Then in the right-hand column, we actually look at how we can write it ourselves. And so when we look at a paraphrase sentence, we can see, okay, so according to Hasanova, so we've got our citation there, we've given that acknowledgement of the attribution. Whilst blockchain technologies promise privacy and security, it is possible to trace a user by observing the pattern of transactions that they make. So we've kept the same ideas, but we've summarized it down from a much longer paragraph to a much shorter sentence. And importantly, we've used our own words. So this would be a good example of paraphrasing or summarizing, because we've provided that attribution, but we have used our own words as much as possible without changing the meaning or intention behind the original source. Just adding someone in back to the online room. So it's important that we can find a way to map out what we already know from our research. And so, as we were just talking about, this can be an effective way of doing this is to write from what you already know. So do all your research, take your notes, then put everything away and just write from what you know without necessarily any quotations or citations in front of you. So in fact, in the first instance, you're potentially aiming to work without any citations at all, or only brief references. So you write your skeleton plan, you put all the key headings, and then you fill in the dot points. And you'll be surprised to find that you actually remember quite a lot. And so if you're able to write as much as possible on your own, then you are definitely using your own words. It shows that you're actually, it requires you to have had a deeper understanding, because you've had to recall that information yourself, synthesize that information and put it into your own words. And then you can go back to your sources from those detailed notes you've taken, and then add in those detailed citations and references. Remembering that you know that none of this is actually original. So you've got all of these ideas from somewhere. So having written it in your own words, go back and identify which sources did you get these different ideas from. And so this process helps you to focus on actually writing your argument based on the research, and then identify the relevant sources of information and evidence, rather than making it about the different, having the focus on what other sources have to say in relation to your argument. In the last few minutes, I'd like to take a moment to talk about developing your writing stance and your voice. So stance refers to how you convey your analysis, your judgments, and your views. So in academic writing, regardless of whether it's an essay, a report, something else, usually is about persuading your audience about something. So you need to be able to identify what the debate or the issue is and take a position within that. So that is your stance. In contrast, your voice is how you distinguish your ideas from others and develop a sense of self. So essentially, it's how you are able to portray your stance and make that persuasive and unique from what others have already said about this particular topic. So your choice of words, phrases, and how you put them together creates your voice and your stance. And this is important because your choice of words not only present your ideas and your argument, but also can give an indication of what you think about what other authors have said on this topic. So for example, if you were to write that author X claims so and so, well, you're suggesting that you don't necessarily agree with them, or you don't think they have a strong claim. Whereas if you go and say that author X argues this, and this is supported by authors Y and Z, then you're suggesting that this is a much stronger claim that they're making. Now, it's important to note that one of the challenges with academic integrity is that often they occur when we're trying to take shortcuts. And the problem is that shortcuts are not always helpful. Thinking and writing simply take time. There's no way around that. So the goal then is really to start early and be realistic, so that you don't find yourself in a position where you have to suddenly need to take shortcuts and accidentally engage in academic misconduct. If you're in doubt, acknowledge and be transparent, including if you're recycling your own work. So if you're not sure whether or not you need to include a page number to be safe. And it's always a good idea to talk to your colleagues, your course conveners, tutors and demonstrators, any mentors you have, to continue to find out more about not only what is good academic integrity practices, but what are perhaps some of the specific nuances or preferred practices within your particular discipline or field.
Yes, can you explain the recycling part?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've ever submitted any work at ANU so far, you'll notice that when you do, you have to sign a declaration. And on Turnitin, you just like you tick a box that says that this is my own work, I have correctly attributed everything, and I have not submitted this work previously.
Okay.
So recycling is when you submit work for another assessment that you've already submitted beforehand. Yes, it's your own work, but at least in the university context, we discourage you from just resubmitting your own work over and over again, because we're trying to give you opportunities to continue to expand and grow your knowledge. And if you keep resubmitting the same thing over and over again, especially if you don't acknowledge that this is my own work, then that's a type of a shortcut, and you're actually just doing yourself a disservice rather than anything else. So we had talked about Turnitin a little bit earlier. So oftentimes this is what it will look like once you've submitted it to Turnitin. At the top there, we have an example of something where the original is too close. So where the wording of the paraphrase is too close to the original. As you can see, that's been highlighted in red. And it's a good opportunity for you to, when you see that, to think about, do I need to rework a particular paraphrase? In the middle, we've got an attempt at a direct quote, and we know it's a direct quote because we've got the quotation marks at the beginning and end of this. However, we can see there's gaps in there. So that means that we haven't done a good enough job of making sure we've captured the direct quote exactly as it is. And then down the bottom, we have a correctly paraphrased and referenced sentence here. So a couple of different ways to Turnitin can help you to identify if you need to revisit your work. So there's a lot of other resources and opportunities across ANU to help you continue to develop your skills. It's really important that you do familiarize yourself with the rules, policies, and procedures, especially as Julian highlighted that ANU did revamp our academic integrity rules and policies last year. So if you haven't had a chance to get up to date with those changed policies, it would be a really good opportunity to do so. You can also attend other academic skills workshops or have appointments with any of the learning advisors or writing coaches or peer writers if you ever want to check, if you have any questions, you have any that you want some clarification in relation to. This is bringing us towards the end of today's session. Hopefully we've managed to address all of your questions so far, but if you had any other questions that we haven't had a chance to address yet, please head back to the same Menti. I'm just going to change the page there so you're on the right page. And please share with us any questions you might have that we'd still like us to address. So that correct page is now up on the Menti, and I will share that. While you're thinking about if you have any questions or not, Julian and I will stick around for a few minutes if you do suddenly think of any questions, but otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you found today's session valuable in terms of finding some tips and tricks to help you avoid plagiarism and make sure that you can make your academic practices be follow as much academic integrity practices as possible. And best of luck with the rest of the semester. Thank you very much, everybody.